The casserole was burnt, the rain had turned to sleet, and my wife again wasn't home. I'm Howard, 57, retired auditor, and that night I ate alone under a flickering kitchen light, listening to the tick of our 20th anniversary clock, still frozen at 5:17. Ever felt like a prop in your own marriage? I'd love to hear how you knew it was time to stop waiting. Tonight, like every year for the past decade, I sat alone on our anniversary. The lasagna tray from Millman's Market was still warm, its aluminum corners crinkled, where I'd hastily peeled back the lid. I portioned out a square with the dull edge of a spatula, slid it onto my grandmother's china, and added a single slice of vanilla cake on the side. I lit the candle on the table not for romance, but to feel less like I was eating in a waiting room. The rain had been steady since noon, whispering against the kitchen window like it wanted to come in. The old house still held warmth, but none of it came from her. Somewhere upstairs, Marlene's curling iron probably still buzzed next to the plugged-in diffuser she always forgot to switch off. A sticky note still clung to the fridge. Youth Ministry planning 6 p.m., back by 8. That had been 3 hours ago. Above the mantel, crooked and unmoving, hung the wooden clock we bought for our 20th anniversary. We'd chosen it together at a crafts fair in Montpellier, a heavy square thing with etched maple leaves and brass hands. It had stopped years ago, stuck at 5:17 since the last power outage. I used to reset it every time. Somewhere along the line, I just didn't. I had dressed for dinner anyway, button shirt slacks. Even applied cologne, the one she bought me for our 30th. As I sliced into the lasagna, my phone chimed. A church group text reminder: potluck menu due Thursday. I placed the phone screen down. I'd saved an old voicemail from Marlene dated back to 2018 when she called from her car to say she'd picked up roses and could I warm up the risotto. I played it again tonight. The static was louder now, the tone more brittle, but her voice, young, vibrant, sincere, reminded me of a version of her I hadn't spoken to in years. I sent her a text. Anniversary dinner's ready if you're on your way. 3 dots appeared, then vanished. The pot roast in the oven had overcooked again. I hadn't meant to make both dishes, but I started the roast before remembering the lasagna. The house smelled like neglect and motion-burnt thyme, metallic sauce, and wax from the candle dripping onto the runner. I sat, chewed slowly, and looked across the table at her empty seat. The picture frame with our wedding photo had migrated over the years from mantel to hallway to now the back of the bottom drawer in my study desk. I found it while looking for an envelope last week. Marlene's smile in that photo was the kind that reached both corners of her eyes. I remember that day, 1988, Lake Champlain wine too strong for a veil. Her father scowled through most of the ceremony. I cleared my plate, wiped the table, and stood beneath the clock. The second hand was misaligned, resting awkwardly between 2 notches. I reached up and dusted it with my sleeve. Some part of me expected it to start ticking. But silence held. Around 10, I heard the garage door creak open. I stayed seated. She came in quietly, removed her heels in the foyer. I heard her sigh as she passed the kitchen, glanced at the clean table, and offered a soft, distracted kiss on my temple. Long day, she said, already heading upstairs. No mention of the date. I stood in the kitchen a while longer, listening to the faint tick of the other clock in the hallway. Cheap, battery-run, dependable. It struck me how that one never stopped. Not once. Maybe it wasn't the prettier one, the symbolic one, but it had done its job. I rinsed my plate in silence. The water ran warm, steady. As I dried the dish and placed it back in the cabinet, I noticed a small chip on its rim. Another thing I'd overlooked. Or chosen to. People always talk about forgetting anniversaries like it's a sudden jolt, a slap of indifference. But it's not. It's a slow erosion like shoreline worn by decades of tide. You don't see it until you're ankle deep in a place you no longer recognize. I looked up once more at the wooden clock still frozen at 5:17. I used to think that moment was when time stopped. But now I wonder if that was just when I stopped hoping it might resume. Upstairs, the shower turned on. Pipes groaned through the old walls. I remembered when we'd moved in how Marlene insisted on painting the kitchen yellow because it felt inviting. That paint had dulled now, stained faintly near the stove where sauce had splattered over the years. I never bothered to touch it up. The drawer near the fridge still held our old anniversary cards. I opened it. The last one signed by her was from 8 years ago, a simple, "Love you always, M." That was back when we still used cursive. Back when always felt like a promise, not a polite ending. I lit a second candle, not for light, but because the silence needed softening. The flicker danced across the glass front of the clock, catching in the dust, like stars that forgot where they belonged. Even now, I still remembered our song Harvest Moon. I played it once weeks ago, softly through the kitchen speaker. Marlene had come in, said nothing, poured herself tea, and went back upstairs. I stood there that day and tonight with a heart. Like that song, quiet, full. A little worn, but still playing. Time didn't stop at 5:17. I just did. Maybe tomorrow I'd buy batteries, or maybe I wouldn't. Maybe I just needed to see if silence could be beautiful too. Chương 2. Paper Cracks đã hoàn thành với 5 kíp 778 ký tự đạt yêu cầu, không thiếu nằm trong phạm vi, plus 10% theo prom time. Nói đăng chương 2, ngồi ngoài dòng kẻ đúng đi one. Âm thầm tự trao chạm và xác đẩy quan sát cảm xúc trong đời thường. The letter from the State Audit Board had sat unopened on my desk for 3 days. It balanced awkwardly atop a stack of tax binders from 2019, just beneath the untouched plastic-wrapped return envelopes I kept telling myself I'd shred. I finally slid it open with a brass letter opener that still had our initials engraved on the handle. H and M. A wedding gift from someone whose name I couldn't recall. The paper was heavier than I expected, thicker stock, formal watermark. Government fonts always had that air of indifference, like the letter itself couldn't be bothered with you. The words swam as I read. Due process under review. Fiduciary oversight irregularities. Named party of interest. I folded the page, then unfolded it, then folded it again. My hands didn't tremble, not visibly, but my thumb found a crease along the edge of the paper and kept tracing it. Outside the study, Marlene was in the kitchen. I could hear her clinking measuring cups against the glass mixing bowl, her voice carrying through the house in cheerful bursts. She was laughing light, high-pitched, the sound she used on her church Zoom calls. Of course I'll bring the lemon bars. You know I can't resist showing off. On my desk, a sticky note sat perched against a 3-hole punch church fundraiser tomorrow. Don't forget to label your casserole. Beneath the note sat the unopened envelope I'd placed there myself 4 days ago. No mention of my hearing. No mention of anything that wasn't breaded or iced. I turned back to the letter. I remembered the transaction clearly. 5 years ago, the 401k reserve transfer for retired staff. A small anomaly, $3,600 misrouted. I flagged it. I even emailed Alan and CC'd the controller. The reply came 3 days later. Let it ride. We'll self-correct next quarter. And I let it go, because Alan had a way of shutting doors softly. But finally, and I was tired. Tired of meetings that began with Howard. Can you take notes? Tired of being the dependable one who never got the credit, only the cleanup. The rain began again, tapping soft rhythms against the study's single window. The beige wallpaper had started peeling near the baseboard, curling like a paper receipt left in a hot car. I'd meant to fix it, like the chair that leaned too far back or the filing cabinet with the loose lock. I heard the mixer start in the kitchen again. Then frosting chatter. Something about sprinkles, something about God's sweetness. I rose, letter still in hand, and made my way down the hall. Marlene stood at the counter, elbows dusted with powdered sugar. She looked like someone in mid-celebration smiling to herself as she scooped frosting into a piping bag. Hey, I said. She glanced up. Hey, hun. Can you believe it? Sister Dina forgot to buy disposable forks again. I told her I'd run out after church. I hesitated. I got a letter from the audit board. She didn't look up. Oh, you get those every year, don't you? This one's different. She kept frosting. Just don't let it ruin your Sunday. Want to taste the lemon glaze? I declined. Not with words. I just stood there long enough for the silence to stretch, then nodded and backed out of the room. Back in the study, I slid open the bottom drawer. The same one that held our wedding photo. I flipped past folders until I found an old invoice, pale green, typed on carbon paper. The date October 16, 2018. the first record of the fund misallocation. It had been here all along dormant. I sat with the paper. I read the amounts. I traced the numbers like someone memorizing a face they once knew well. The misalignment wasn't just financial, it was the first lie I had swallowed in silence. My phone buzzed. Voicemail, a familiar voice clipped and weary. Howard, they're asking if you can cover Alan again. Budget's due Monday. Call me back if you're up for it. I stared at the screen until it dimmed. I opened the filing cabinet, pulled out a faded red folder, and labeled it in blocky pen, "Not worth it." I slid the letter inside. On the way out, I passed the wooden clock still frozen at 5:17. The dust I'd wiped the night before had already begun to settle again. Nothing had changed. Not really. And I didn't feel angry or sad, I just felt archived. I sat back down at my desk, listening to the distant hum of the refrigerator and the occasional clink of baking trays. From the hallway, the faint tick of the hallway clock, a cheap one from a chain store, reminded me of everything still moving. It wasn't just the letter or the cupcakes or the invoice. It was the slow fading of being needed, of being essential. There was a time Marlene asked about my day, a time when my job seemed like more than just numbers in sealed envelopes and gray-toned printouts. I leaned back, let my eyes wander to the ceiling where water stains had formed a subtle oval shape, like a halo stained with time. I traced it with my eyes, letting it distract me for a few seconds longer. I could bring the letter up again later, over dinner maybe, or maybe I'd forget. Maybe I'd let it slide the way that misallocation did. Not everything needed confrontation. Some things dissolved better when left alone. I closed the drawer, shut off the desk lamp, and stepped into the dim hallway. The wedding clock loomed as I passed quiet, upright, and unread. I didn't stop. Some days, silence feels like a choice. Other days, it's just what's left when no one's listening. I paused before heading upstairs. The casserole dish was still empty, sitting on the stovetop, like a question waiting for its label. I picked up the sticky note, read it again, and then folded it twice into a square small enough to disappear in my palm. "You look like someone whose dog died," Craig said, setting a steaming mug of black coffee in front of me. "Except I know you're allergic to pets." The mug scraped slightly on the tabletop. He always brought his own coffee from the counter instead of waiting for the waitress. I watched the thin steam curl up and fade, disappearing just as quickly as it formed. I slept weird, I lied. Craig smirked. "You always sleep weird. That's what marriage does. Contorts your spine and your expectations." The diner was half empty like usual on a mid-November Thursday. A few retirees in corner booths murmured over pancakes. The sound system piped in soft jazz Miles Davis, or someone imitating him. Outside, the pavement was still wet from last night's drizzle. Clumps of maple leaves clung to the tires of Craig's old truck. Craig Abbott looked exactly the same as he had 5 years ago. Flannel shirt, wind-worn face, and the kind of tan that didn't come from vacations, but from living by the lake. He'd retired early not because he had a plan, but because he ran out of reasons not to. "Remember Jenkins?" he asked, unwrapping a napkin from around his cutlery. "Back in procurement. Used to bring a banana and a flask to every meeting." I chuckled. Said it was for potassium and patience. Craig laughed, the kind that echoed from his chest. God, that man hated everyone equally. A real egalitarian. The waitress, Bonnie, I think, walked over and set down 2 plates without asking. "Your usuals," she said. "And I threw in an extra sausage today. You look like you needed protein." I thanked her with a nod. She was gone before Craig could flirt, which was her usual strategy. Craig dug into his eggs with the satisfaction of someone who earned every calorie. I stared at mine. The yolks wobbled a little untouched. "I opened a letter this week," I said. "Audit board stuff. They're pinning me for a transfer I flagged years ago." Craig stopped chewing. "You flagged it?" "Yeah. But I didn't push." Alan brushed it off. He wiped his mouth with a napkin, then folded it in half like origami. "So now they're holding the bag and handing it to you." "Pretty much." We ate in silence for a few minutes. My eggs went cold. Craig refilled his coffee from a thermos he kept in the booth. "I get it," he finally said. "You don't want to stir the water. You're not a confrontational guy." "No, I'm not. But here's the thing," he said, tapping his fork gently on the rim of my plate. "Retirement's not an escape. It's a second draft, but only if you edit the first one. I raised an eyebrow. That your lake wisdom talking, he smiled. Damn right. You ever been out to Pine Loop? That cabin I got small, stupid, quiet. Leaks a bit in spring, but hell, it's mine. After Lorna left, I needed something that didn't argue back. You live alone, unless you count a raccoon who thinks my deck is his porch. I don't mind him. He minds his business. I pulled out my phone and scrolled through my photo roll. I stopped at a picture I'd taken on our anniversary night. The wooden clock hung crooked on the wall, still stuck at 5:17. Here, I said, showing Craig the screen. She stopped winding it. I stopped asking why. Craig leaned closer. Beautiful piece. Used to mean something. Now it's just part of the wall. He sipped his coffee. If she's forgotten you 10 times, maybe it's time you remember yourself once. The words landed in the space between us heavier than the clatter of cutlery or the hum of jazz. I didn't respond. Not right away. I wasn't sure I had a response that wouldn't sound like resignation. We paid the check and stepped outside. The cold bit a little sharper now. I pulled my coat tight. Craig, of course, didn't notice his body was always a few degrees behind the forecast. Near the entrance of the diner, an old corkboard displayed faded community flyers, piano lessons, handyman services, church bake sales. One caught my eye. A simple for sale by owner paper torn at the corners, printed in bold black letters. A photo of a modest house, sloped roof, wooden porch, a glimpse of the lake behind it. No address, just a phone number and a first name, Lori. I tore off one of the tags with the number. Craig noticed. Thinking of moving, I shook my head. Just curious. He nodded. Curiosity's the start of every good change. We walked to our cars. The leaves crackled beneath our boots, scattered and soaked like a collage that hadn't dried right. See you next week, he asked, opening his door. Yeah, I said. Same time. He drove off first, his truck growling into the road. I stood for a moment longer, the paper with Lori's number folded between my fingers. Somewhere behind me inside the diner, the jazz track changed. And for a brief second, I imagined what it might be like to hear music like that, from my own porch. Back home, I tucked the flyer into the back of my wallet, behind a receipt from a hardware store I couldn't remember visiting. I didn't tell Marlene about the diner or the conversation or the lake house. I wasn't hiding, I was just holding it close like a match you're not ready to strike. I reheated coffee that didn't need reheating just to hear the microwave beep. The kitchen smelled faintly of lemon bars and lavender hand soap. The casserole dish was still soaking in the sink, half cleaned. Upstairs, the bedroom door was closed. Light peeked from the crack at the bottom, flickering like a signal I couldn't interpret. I looked again at the photo of the clock. Its brass hands stopped forever at 5:17. I zoomed in and noticed something I hadn't before, a faint hairline crack along the wooden frame, running like a quiet split in a tree's bark. Not wide, not deep, but there. Everything breaks quietly, I thought. The hard part is knowing when it started. It's not that I forgot. Marlene snapped, her voice cutting through the static air of our dimly lit kitchen. It's that you keep needing me to remember. The rain outside had escalated from a whisper to a steady drumbeat, tapping against the window like an impatient hand. I'd left the porch light off. The motion sensor didn't even bother flickering when she came in. She moved too slowly now to trigger anything. She set her keys in the bowl by the fridge, not bothering to take off her wet shoes. Mud streaks patterned the tile behind her. They're planning a youth retreat next spring, she said, unwinding a scarf and tossing it on the chair without looking at me. Somewhere upstate. I told them I'd help coordinate lodging. I stood by the sink, towel in hand, drawing a Tupperware lid I'd washed more out of ritual than need. Tonight, I said, would have been a good night to eat together. She reached into the oven and pulled out the rice casserole she'd prepped before church. The edges were blackened. The middle sank like a collapsed memory. She sniffed it, then scraped a corner and tasted. Still edible, she mumbled, grabbing a plate. I waited, I said. Like I do every year. She turned, blinking as though I'd just interrupted a prayer. Howard, we've been married 32 years. We don't need to circle the calendar like teenagers. But you used to. She sighed and took a bite. We used to do a lot of things. The kitchen clock ticked on, not the wedding clock, the wall unit above the pantry. That one still ran, still obeyed its batteries. I moved to the drawer and retrieved 2 forks. One slipped from my fingers and fell with a sharp clang onto the tile. I bent quickly, too quickly, and as I reached sideways for support, my elbow caught the shelf. The wooden clock, our 20-year anniversary gift, tipped forward and fell. The sound was not shattering but cracking. Like ice breaking in warm water, it hit face first. The glass splintered not into chaos, but with a single rupture, a diagonal line from 11 to 5. The hands forever fixed at 5:17 now wore a scar. We both froze. I turned to Marlene. She stared, her casserole still midair. "I didn't mean to," I said. She shrugged. "That clock meant something to me." She placed her plate down and wiped her fingers. "We're not that couple anymore, Howard. We haven't been for a long time." She walked upstairs without another word, her footsteps soft but final. I stayed kneeling. The clock lay on its back glass, cracked but frame intact. My fingers hovered above it, unsure whether to comfort or discard. Eventually, I brushed the shards into the Tupperware lid I'd just dried. One sliver caught my thumb. It didn't draw blood, but it reminded me I could still feel. I didn't eat. The casserole cooled untouched. The room smelled of burnt starch and retreat. I opened my laptop on the kitchen counter. The screen glowed too brightly against the warm yellow light. I typed slowly. 3-bedroom colonial-style corner lot close to church and market. I paused. Then typed the owner's name as L. Benton, an old family name, not mine. I attached a photo of the front of the house, one I'd taken last fall when the hydrangeas were still blooming. No interior shots, no clock on the wall. I didn't click submit, not yet. But I hovered, just long enough for the site to auto-save the draft. Outside, church bells rang in the distance. I wondered which service they signaled. Evening prayer. Late-night confession. I didn't pray. I didn't confess. I bookmarked the listing, just in case forgetting became easier than forgiving. Back when we first hung that clock, I remember holding the nails steady while Marlene told me to measure twice. She wore a green cardigan, hair still damp from her afternoon shower, and she laughed when I installed it slightly crooked. Charming, she called it. It never quite aligned even then. I remembered the sound it made every hour, deep wooden clicks that punctuated our evenings like punctuation in a novel. We used to time our Sunday crossword breaks by it. She'd groan when I filled in answers too quickly, pretending she wanted the clues to stretch longer. I stared now at that same face, scarred, still silent. I reached into the drawer for tape, wrapped the shards carefully in paper towels, and sealed the lid. I wrote fragile on the top. I didn't know where I'd put it, but it felt wrong to toss away something that once kept time for us. A dog barked in the neighbor's yard. Lights flicked on 2 doors down. The world outside kept moving, but here at 5:17 time sat quietly in a Tupperware container, waiting for someone to remember. Later that night, I sat by the kitchen window, staring out at the shimmering puddles on the driveway, distorted reflections of porch lights, and a flickering neighbor's lamp. The microwave clock blinked 12 alarms, must have reset during the last power outage, but I hadn't noticed. I sipped reheated coffee. It tasted burnt and thin, but it gave my hands something to do. A faint ticking filled the silence. The pantry clock still ran, faithful, impersonal. I never cared for it, never chose it. It came with the house. Functional, not memorable. I opened my wallet, pulled out the flyer from Pine Lake. Lori's number stared up at me like a dare. I folded it again, smaller this time, and slid it between the pages of our old church bulletin tucked beside the fridge. In the drawer below the sink, I placed the sealed Tupperware box, gently next to old batteries, rubber bands, and a single key I no longer recognized. Then I closed the drawer softly. Some goodbyes don't sound like doors slamming. They sound like nothing at all. The closing papers made a soft thud when I placed them inside the drawer next to our wedding album. I didn't plan it that way. The album had been in there for years, the drawer reserved for important things that stopped being urgent, expired passports, a spare checkbook, the deed to a car we no longer owned. Now the album was taped shut, not aggressively, just enough to suggest I wasn't going to open it again. Outside, the first snow of December was falling soft and deliberate, like it had nowhere to be. Through the window, the lawn looked peaceful, smoothed out like someone had erased all the clutter with a white brush. At 9:15 a.m., I drove to the credit union in town. The notary greeted me with a smile that was professionally pleasant. Her office smelled faintly of cinnamon and printer ink. A small wreath hung beside the copier. The buyer was already there, Michael Keller, mid-40s, neat beard, heavy winter coat that looked too expensive for Vermont. He smiled and nodded, flipping through the pages. "We'll do the post-close possession addendum as discussed," the agent said. 2 weeks. Gives you time to make arrangements. I signed where she pointed, slowly, methodically, pressing harder on the last signature than I meant to. The ballpoint skipped slightly, leaving a thicker line on the tail of my D. "That's it," she said. "Congratulations, Mr. Taylor. You just sold your home." I nodded. "Feels efficient." Michael offered a firm handshake. "It's a beautiful house. My partner and I love the backyard. Planning to host next 4th of July. I imagined the patio lights strung across the yard, laughter from people I didn't know. It felt like remembering a party I was never invited to. Back home, the house greeted me with its usual silence. The snow muffled all outside sound, making everything feel interior, intimate, final. Marlene was upstairs. I heard the thrum of her voice, distant and cheerful, floating down through the vents. "Of course we'll host the Christmas brunch here," she said. "The guest room's getting new paint this weekend. Sage green, soothing, right?" I stood by the stairwell unseen. I could picture her on the phone, pacing with purpose, her free hand gesturing even though no one could see it. She didn't know. I'd already boxed the guest room's curtains. The paint chips she'd left on the counter were in the recycling bin. She passed me in the hallway an hour later, humming, "Hey, would you mind picking up some extra folding chairs from the church basement later? We'll need them for next week." "Sure," I said. I opened the hall closet and placed the boxed wedding album gently behind a stack of linens. The tape seal made a quiet crinkle. I closed the door. That afternoon, I wrapped the clock. I used yesterday's newspaper comics page. I didn't have bubble wrap. I folded the corners carefully, smoothing them like hospital corners on a bed. The crack on the clock's glass caught the light as I tucked it in the box. I didn't label the outside. Dinner was leftovers again. The same casserole dryer, now the rice grains stiff around the edges. I didn't heat it. I sat in the kitchen eating cold bites with a plastic fork. Less out of laziness, more because it seemed like the kindest thing I could do to not disturb the silence. I looked around the kitchen. Every object held a memory, the burn mark on the countertop from the Thanksgiving. She forgot the pie was still baking. The chipped mug she insisted on using because the handle fits my hand just right. The clock's absence on the wall left a clean pale square, like it had been erased. I finished my meal, rinsed the plate, and turned off the light. The glow from the hallway crept in, softening the edges of the room. "This isn't mine anymore," I whispered to no one. I sat at the desk in the study, typed slowly. Subject Thursday. Body, please be home by 5 next Thursday. I need to tell you something important. I hovered over send for a long moment, then clicked. The email made a quiet whoosh as it left. Upstairs, I heard Marlene laugh again. Something on TV, maybe, or a phone call. I didn't check. I sat in the dark study, hands folded the box with the clock at my feet. Outside, the snow kept falling. Later, while organizing the boxes in the garage, I found an old broom handle Marlene had painted once. She used to paint wooden things, edges of flower pots, broomsticks, even the side of the raised garden bed. Little sunburst vine spirals that faded over time. I ran my fingers over the faint green vines still visible on the handle, dusty but intact, like a message left in another language. I tucked it gently beside the clock box, unsure if either belonged to me anymore. Inside, I brewed tea, not coffee. The tea bags had sat untouched for months, purchased during one of Marlene's clean-eating phases. The water boiled louder than expected. I poured it into her chipped mug, the one with the smooth handle, and held it for a while before placing it in the drying rack untouched. That night, I took the long way to bed. Past the study, past the guest room she wanted painted. I paused by the stairs, then descended again, flicked on the porch light. Snow blanketed the steps, unshoveled, soft, and waiting. I stepped outside without a coat. Just for a moment, long enough to know the cold still mattered, long enough to feel the world shift ever so slightly beneath my feet. I left at 4 a.m. on a Thursday. The house was still dark. So was my marriage. The driveway crunched under the tires like breaking bones, sharp and final. I didn't look back at the porch light that always flickered. I didn't leave a note, just an email. Don't wait up. The boxes fit easily in the trunk. I didn't need much, just clothes, some tools. The sealed clock and the box marked paper things. Craig had slipped a thermos and a folded map into the back seat when I wasn't looking, just in case, he'd said the day before, tapping the roof of my car, like he was sending off a son to college. Pine Lake was a 2-hour drive. Fog hugged the tree lines and the road curved like a question I hadn't asked. By the time I arrived, the sun was teasing the horizon, light filtering through bare branches like hope, pretending to be certainty. The cabin sat on a slight rise overlooking the lake. Single-story, wood-paneled shutters missing a few slats. But it stood, quietly, confidently. Inside, the air smelled of cedar and dust. The floors were cold and honest. A box of firewood waited by the hearth like it knew I'd need it before I asked. I dropped the boxes in the living room and went straight for the one marked time. I peeled the tape gently. Inside, wrapped in yesterday's funnies and layers of worry, lay the wooden clock. The crack across its glass glinted faintly in the dawn light. It looked tired. I set it on the kitchen table and unpacked the glue cotton swabs and a soft cloth. For hours I worked, cleaning the glass, aligning the fracture, holding pieces steady with painter's tape. My fingers grew sticky, stained with resin. I inhaled dust and memory. At some point I warmed the thermos. Black coffee. No sugar. Craig knew me better than I thought. The glue took hold. I peeled the tape, slowly wiped away residue. The crack remained visible but sealed like a healed scar that no longer hurt to touch. I polished the wood until it caught the morning sun. Then I climbed a small stool and hung it above the fireplace, exactly centered. For a long time I stared at it. The hands pointed to 5:17 still. I pulled the knob, gently twisting, until the second hand moved. The click echoed not loudly but sharply in the stillness. I set it to the exact time, 11:36 a.m. Then I stepped back. The ticking began, soft, persistent. The kind of sound you only hear when everything else is silent. The kind that makes silence feel full. That afternoon I walked the lake path. The air smelled of pine needles and something ancient. Ice fringed the edges of the water. A flock of geese crossed overhead in a V, disappearing into cloud. I took pictures of tree bark, close-up of sunbeam reflections of wildflowers frozen mid-bloom. A neighbor passed nodding, an older man in flannel and thick boots. He said nothing but tipped his cap. Back inside I unpacked more boxes, found the broom handle with faded green vines, hung it beside the kitchen window like a forgotten hymn. I cooked pasta, oversalted it, ate it anyway. Evening settled quickly in the woods. The trees outside framed the sky like a cathedral, branches raised in slow benediction. The clock ticked on. I sat by the fire. No TV, no music. Just flames and wood and the faint mechanical heartbeat above the mantel. The cabin breathed differently than the house in Burlington. It didn't hold its breath. I opened the paper things box. Inside were letters, warranties, old tax records, and at the bottom the church bulletin with Lori's number. Folded 3 times. I left it there. When I placed the last folder back into the drawer, my phone buzzed. Voicemail. I hadn't heard it ring. I held it in my hand, debating. The caller ID read Marlene. I pressed play. Howard, her voice began tight, confused. Where are you? A pause. I came home and... You weren't here. There's a casserole in the fridge and your toothbrush is gone. And I static. I don't know what this is, but please, just tell me you're okay. Silence. Then please. I stared at the fire. The clock ticked. And for the first time in years, I knew the time was right. Outside snow had begun again, this time slower. I opened the front door and stepped onto the porch. The cold air touched my cheeks like fingers reminding me I was alive. The lake was still rimmed with frost. The clouds had thinned enough to reveal stars faint but patient. I sat on the porch swing, rusty but functional, and let the wooden slats creak beneath me. The thermos sat on the side table, still half full. I took a sip. It had cooled but not unpleasantly. The voicemail replayed in my mind, not the words but the tone. The way Howard sounded more like a question than a name. There had been love once. There had been holidays, jokes, church picnics, small moments in the grocery aisle. We used to split milkshakes. We used to argue over crossword puzzles. Maybe we'd forgotten more than we realized. Inside, the fire cracked softly. I stood, stretched my back, and walked back in. I pulled a thick blanket over the couch and laid down, not to sleep, but to rest. The clock ticked above the fire, not loud, not proud, just present, like me. You left without a word, she cried. Like I didn't matter. I let the silence sit. The fire crackled beside me, soft like distant applause. Outside, the snow had thickened, lazy white drapes falling across the cabin windows. My coffee had gone lukewarm, but I held the mug anyway. It grounded me. Marlene's voice over the line was high-strained, teetering between anger and heartbreak. I pictured her in the kitchen, pacing in wool socks, cordless phone clutched tightly, the same kitchen where we used to dance to old jazz while waiting for pasta to boil. You didn't even leave a note, she said. Just disappeared. You didn't notice I'd already been gone, I said quietly, for years. There was a pause. I could almost hear her blink. That's not fair, she said. No, I said. But it's true. She shifted. I heard the scrape of a chair leg, the click of a ring tapping porcelain. Her breathing slowed, shallow and irregular. I kept the home going, church work, cooking, everything. You just retreated. And you forgot, I said, every year. You forgot me. I was tired, she snapped. I gave so much, I wasn't asking for so much. Just dinner on October 12th, once a year. More silence. You think this cabin solves anything, she asked. Running off, that's what cowards do. I didn't run, I said. I walked. And for the first time in a decade, I knew where I was going. Her breath caught. It came out like the start of a sob but stopped short. I don't even know what to say to you, she whispered. You don't have to say anything. Just listen. I let the fire speak for a moment. This place, I said, it's not about escaping you. It's about remembering me. She didn't respond, but she stayed on the line. I imagined the snow falling over our old house in Burlington, blanketing the sidewalk, covering the empty garden beds she never replanted. I wondered if she was wearing the scarf I bought her 5 anniversaries ago, the one she never thanked me for. I loved you, Howard, she said finally. I know, I said. And I loved you. Loved, she echoed. Past tense. Right now, I'm trying to love myself. We ended the call, not with a bang, but a hush. No goodbyes. Just the small digital chime that signaled disconnection. I set the phone down. The blinking light from her 10 saved messages, still pulsed steady, insistent like a heartbeat, I no longer recognized. I stared at it for a long while. Then slowly, I pressed delete, confirmed it. Watched the light go dark. The cabin exhaled. An hour later, Craig knocked. He never called ahead. He stepped in, stomped the snow from his boots, and held out a small foil-wrapped loaf. Banana bread, not mine. Linda made it. She says you look too thin. I've been eating, I said. He didn't reply, just set the loaf on the table and poured himself a mug from the pot. We sat by the fire, not talking. After a while, he said, You sound lighter, do I? He nodded, like someone who just remembered their first name. I smiled into my cup. Craig didn't stay long. He never did. Before leaving, he pulled on his jacket and added, Snow's not supposed to let up till morning. Might be a good night to start that puzzle you bought. He meant the one with the lake and the barn owl. It was still unopened by the bookshelf. When he left the room, didn't feel empty, just paused. Later, I took out my camera. I scrolled through the weak images of lake ice crow feathers on snow, a doe's print near the dock. Each photo had breath in it, the kind of breath you notice only when it's cold enough to see it. As I placed the camera on the table, a white envelope slid beneath the front door. No postmark, just Pine County Arts Committee in green lettering. Inside was a letter handwritten careful. We invite you to submit up to 3 pieces for consideration in the New Year's exhibit. Quiet, Vermont. Submissions close December 28th. We hope you will share what you've seen. I turned the envelope over in my hands, the thick cream paper whispering something I hadn't heard in years. You are still seen. The kettle hissed from the stovetop. I poured hot water over a chamomile bag, Marlene's favorite, though I'd never told her I'd grown to like it too. I didn't need to anymore. As I sipped, I scribbled notes in the margins of a notepad. Craig had left. Photo ideas, a poem fragment, the beginning of something I wasn't sure how to name yet. Outside, the moon hung low and round above the lake caught between drifting clouds. I stepped out for a moment, letting snow collect on my shoulders like a benediction. The world felt hushed, as if holding its breath with me. I remembered the last photo Marlene ever took of me. It was blurred accidental. My face turned away as I stirred a pot of chili. She'd printed it, stuck it on the fridge, then replaced it with a church flyer a week later. I never told her I'd kept the photo. It was now in my drawer beside the clock manual and the art exhibit invitation. Maybe it was time to take a picture of myself on purpose. I walked back in and lit a second log in the fire. The banana bread still sat untouched. Tomorrow I'd eat it. Or maybe I'd bring it to Mr. Beach. The voicemail icon no longer blinked. The silence was whole, not hollow. When I lay down on the couch that night, the only sound was the ticking of the clock. And for once, it didn't measure what I'd lost. It marked what I still had time to become. The gallery smelled like lemon oil and new wood frames. A quiet, polished reverence hung in the air like a chapel, but warmer. The lighting was soft, intentional, glinting off white walls and maple floors. I stood behind my prints, invisible again, but this time by choice. It was early spring 2024. Pine County Gallery had opened its doors for the annual exhibit that drew in locals, retirees, the curious, and the quiet. I wore a gray sweater Marlene once said made me look honest. It still fit. I had arrived early to hang the 3 selected prints. The first frost-laced branches backlit by a rose-colored dawn. The second a reflection on Pine Lake so precise it could be mistaken for a painting. And the last, my favorite, was of the wooden clock mid-repair. My hands wrinkled, glue-stained steady. Held the glass in place, the crack still visible like a healed scar. I titled the collection 35 Seasons of Marriage. I didn't sign my name. A small card beside the set read, "Only Anonymous, Burlington and Pine Lake." Visitors drifted past slowly. No rush, no commentary, unless something moved them. A few paused longer at the clock photo. One man adjusted his glasses and leaned closer. "It feels familiar," he murmured. An elderly woman in a lavender coat touched her chest. "It reminds me of Sunday mornings, when we used to wind ours after Mass." I nodded politely, then took a step back, sipping coffee from a white paper cup the gallery provided. It had cooled, but I liked it that way. Marlene didn't come. I hadn't expected her to. There had been no more calls after the last. Just silence. But it wasn't cruel, it was clear. Like windows cleaned after a long winter. The gallery owner, a lean woman with sharp eyes and silver-streaked hair, approached me mid-afternoon. "You're the one with the clock?" I smiled. "One of many with clocks, I suppose." "Well," she said, tilting her head, "this one is different. It doesn't pretend to be whole. That's rare." "Neither do I," I replied. She laughed softly. "You should consider submitting next year." "Maybe." I walked to the far end of the exhibit, past a trio of watercolors and a sculpture of folded steel. Children shuffled by with juice boxes tugging at their parents' sleeves. Somewhere someone dropped a program. It fluttered like a large moth. Then a boy, maybe 7, stood before the photo of the clock. He tugged at his grandfather's hand. "Is that magic?" he asked, pointing to the crack. The man smiled. "Why don't you ask?" The boy turned to me, brown eyes wide. "Is it?" I crouched beside him. "No," I said. "Just repair." He blinked, puzzled. "But it looks so fixed." "It is," I said. "Mostly. That's the thing about some breaks. They don't go away. They just stop hurting. He seemed to consider this, then nodded solemnly and skipped away, the kind of movement only children get to do without irony. As the afternoon waned, I circled once more through the gallery, noting prints, comments, the soft hush of appreciation. I saw Mr. Beach from the lake in the corner, chatting with someone I didn't recognize. He wore the same flannel jacket unbuttoned. I nodded to him. He raised his cup. I didn't linger near my work. I'd already said what I needed to say. When I stepped outside, the wind carried the scent of thawing earth. Crocuses pushed through a patch of mulch near the sidewalk. The sun was still above the horizon, barely but present. I didn't go straight home. Instead, I walked a few blocks to a quiet diner Craig once mentioned. Inside, I ordered soup and half a sandwich. The waitress brought it without fuss, just a smile and a water glass that fogged the coaster. I ate slowly with both hands, no distractions, no phone. Afterward, I took the long way back to the cabin. The lake shimmered like it remembered me. Geese skimmed the water's surface, trailing ripples like commas in a sentence still being written. I unpacked a new frame when I returned one I'd bought weeks ago, but hadn't found the right photo for. Now I had it. The clock cracked but polished. My hands. The light through the window that morning. I slid it into place and hung it above the small desk near the fireplace. That night I didn't make tea. I didn't need to. I simply sat with the ticking of the clock, the silence of my choosing, and the space I'd made for something not new, but honest. Not perfect. Just mine. The clock above my desk ticks softly now, no longer a reminder of what was broken, but proof of what endured. This morning, sunlight spilled across the lake, catching on the mended glass, like a quiet reward for choosing peace over noise. I've learned that sometimes we leave not to escape, but to return to ourselves. That healing doesn't require applause, just space, patience, and maybe a steady hand with a bit of glue. And that time once feared can become a friend again. Has life ever handed you a second chance in disguise? I'd love to hear your story. Feel free to share it in the comments or subscribe if you'd like to walk together a little longer.